Hello, this video is going to cover the short article by Simone de Beauvoir, In France Today, Killing Goes Unpunished, which appeared in the February 15th, 1971 issue of J'accuse. The version and translation that I will be referring to is collected in the Political Writings volume of this, again, excellent series of Simone de Beauvoir by the University of Illinois Press. So Margaret Simons is the general editor of that series. So this short article is collected in that particular text. Beauvoir is responding here to an accident at a factory that resulted in a lot of young women and girls, but also younger men working in the factory being either killed or very severely burned and left with permanent disabilities. And Beauvoir holds the factory owner culpable, of course, for negligence by demanding that people work in hazardous conditions without regard to their safety, but also as an indictment of the general labor system in France that is skewed toward the owners of the factories and protects them. She finds that the sort of punishment and the consequences for the factory owners are disproportionate to the harm that they cause, this sort of slap on the wrist type of response. And Beauvoir really wants to pressure readers to not just take responsibility for the system that they enable by demanding cheap consumer goods or so on, but also to push for political reforms that will make conditions better for workers. So there are some, I think, parallels and resonances with other things in history that we can look at. Of course, the Triangle Shirtwaist fire in 1911, that killed 146 garment workers, 123 women and girls, and 23 men. So I think the emphasis there on the women is significant for what Beauvoir is talking about in this particular article, and is addressing similar social ills, unsafe working conditions, exploitation of workers, and so on and so forth. You can see, so the Mr. Berrillon, the owner of the factory here, 1 year suspended sentence and a 20,000 franc fine. So he no jail time. The sentence is suspended, but even so, only 1 year. Very simply, set 57 of his female workers on fire. 3 are dead, others are mutilated or disfigured forever. Such is bourgeois justice. So you can see immediately Beauvoir's taking a position of polemic here. So if you compare this to some of the other materials that we've looked at of a much more kind of academic nature, the style and the nature of Beauvoir's writing is very different. This is clearly polemical, that is geared toward activism, changing hearts and minds of her readers and trying to change through her writing the material conditions of people who are laborers, right? So he benefits from this amnesty. He's guilty of gross negligence, and he still is in control. He directs new prosperous business. When one speaks of Meru to him, he responds it was an accident. And Meru is the site of the factory, of course, where this accident took place. Small town, 6,000 inhabitants, 57 kilometers northwest of Paris, so it's outside of the city, about 25 miles or so outside of the city of Paris. A small town, artisans, shopkeepers, farmers, she says. Industrial zone cropped up, so it's relatively new. This article, it's about 10 years or so before the accident that this industrial area in the town began cultivation and development. And the factory is, of course, dealing with a lot of volatile chemicals, butane, propane, alcohol, kerosene, and so on. Now, she says that it's stored 27 tons. Now, this is already almost double what it was supposed to store. So again, like other situations that are comparable, other kinds of industrial accidents, there are regulations in place that are being ignored. And one of the ways that they can be ignored is because there are complicit inspectors and even other workers that are in middle management and things like that who are facilitating the circumspection of these regulations, right? They're helping the factory owner get away with neglect by patching over or falsifying documents or something. So we can see already they're in excess of what they should be storing already, right? So there's also a lot of gas leaks. Gas leaks spread out along the ground often occurred because the pipes circulated in non-ventilated trenches. Also, the valves of the propane and butane tanks were poorly closed. In March and April of 1967, a fire broke out several times, so there are incidences leading up to this ultimate accident that she's addressing here. Again, you can see this not just in places like the United States. I mean, my great-great-grandfather was killed in an industrial accident at a Kelly Springfield Tire Company. His arms were caught in a machine and crushed, and he bled to death on the floor. So this is a pattern of neglect on the part of factory owners and their accomplices that not just happened here in France and the United States, but continues on to this day. I think we could compare the type of situation that Beauvoir is analyzing in this article with, for instance, the 2012 Dhaka garment factory fire in Bangladesh that supplies places like Walmart and other large big box retailers, not just in the United States, but also in China with garment. There's a fire there that killed 117 people and over 200 injuries. Also, of course, in Bangladesh, the 2013 Rana Plaza collapse, which killed 1,134 garment workers with 2,500 injured people. That building collapsed because of structural inadequacies that had been reported. Again, in both of these cases, both in the 2012 Dhaka fire and in the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh, there had been reports leading up to the accidents that had been patched over and ignored, and workers had been encouraged to come in and that kind of situation. So Beauvoir is addressing what she views to be a real structural and systematic problem in capitalist modes of production, whereby working conditions are made unsafe by corner cutting in order to maximize profit. Right? If you address all of these issues and you follow all the rules, it's a bit more expensive than if you neglect the building and fail to upkeep things and all of that sort of stuff. Right? Maintaining a pristine work environment cuts into the profits of the capitalist class at the expense of workers, right? Workers become truly human resources that are not viewed as human beings that are owed safe conditions or anything like that. And so they become expendable, or they're viewed as being expendable, of course, right? I mean, I think Beauvoir's point is that they're not actually expendable, and they're not being treated well, and then they're not being well cared for after they are maimed or mutilated in certain ways. So the other thing that Beauvoir, in addition to criticizing the attitude and practices of the owners of the factories, is also criticizing how well these people are looked after in the aftermath of the accident, that they're not properly cared for, that they're not given what is owed to them by the French Social Security Administration. In France, the Social Security system is much more broad than in the United States, and it deals with a lot more social goods, including unemployment and disability, which a lot of the people that suffered in this incident in Meru are owed. But there's ways in which, again, this is why she's looking at it as a systematic problem in which a lot of different actors are complicit, because there's also sort of cost-cutting measures in the application of the Social Security benefits that people who are disabled now as a result of the fire, or who have they were working successfully and making headway in an industry, and now they can't work in that anymore, so their livelihood is compromised or taken from them, and they're having to switch gears, that kind of thing. Beauvoir thinks that the system is structured to try to give those people the least benefit possible. So any way in which a person can be, oh, well, it's bad, but it's not that bad, so you're only going to get this percent. That's the other thing that she is discussing. Closer to the end of the article, she says, a third outrage is the measures taken by the Social Security Agency. When a person is estimated to be less than 50% disabled, he only receives half of the pension, which should be his right due to that disability. Someone who is 14% disabled receives 7% of his salary, and so on. The advising doctors for the Sécurité Sociale embrace the interests of the Social Security Agency, and not those of the victims. In Meru, where most of the victims were judged to be 14 to 20% disabled and receive 400 francs each trimester, so 3 times a year, right? What's more, the sum is only given to them if they start work again. So there's work requirements attached to their disability benefits, that if they're not going back, or they're not working, then they can't get the benefits. And this is the case of Martine Baron, 19-year-old, recently married. She was 15 at the time of the accident. She stayed for a month at the hospital in Lille, wavering between life and death. After 7 months in Lille, she spent 7 months back in Berck, where she underwent an extremely painful rehabilitation treatment. Attached to a board, she stayed on her back for 2 hours and then on her stomach for 2 hours. She cried from morning until evening due to the pain and loneliness. She spent a year and a half of convalescence with her parents. Seriously burned from her waist to her feet. She had a great number of skin grafts done, and there, I think, is the source of a lot of the pain in that rehabilitation. Twisted feet, kidneys and legs still hurt. A skin condition now appears dead. Beauvoir visited this person. She saw firsthand. She says that Martine Baron showed me her body. Her entire lower back is cracked and swollen in an awful way. However, only compensated at 7% based on a 14% disability. She has to work, so for 9.5 hours each day she is on her feet, which are scarred from the factory fire, carrying plywood planks. So Beauvoir has sort of 3 prongs to her attack here. One, at the factory owners, who are trying to maximize profits at the expense of their worker safety, and treating workers as just things for the accomplishment of their profits. Then at the system of accomplices, the middle management people who plaster over and facilitate unsafe working environments by failing to report certain things, by instructing workers to ignore or to work anyway, by failing to follow regulations that are already in place, so on and so forth. And then, of course, at the apparatus of the state that inadequately cares for citizens and actually operates in its own interest, right? Here, it's just another site of profit maximization, where she says the Social Security Administration is working for its own benefit, so that it has to pay out as little as possible to people who have been harmed, and while also demanding that they work. So pushing them back into the wage system so that they can continue to be a good human resource for some other capitalist. So you can see Beauvoir's arguments are definitely rooted in a labor and worker-centric model, where she is viewing herself as a voice for the people who are least empowered in this system, and against the not just individuals. I mean, existentialism has been. We've seen that existentialism has tried to sort of work this middle path between the individual and the system. That it recognizes the value and the absolute importance of the individual while still maintaining structural analyses of the situation and the context in which they're in. So Beauvoir is calling out particular individuals, the factory owners, and particular workers who are in middle management and foreman positions within the factory, while also pointing out broader systematic problems in the regulatory system, in the social security system, that lead to grave injustices being done to the workers who are the victims of these incidents. And again, I want you to see that the kinds of arguments that Beauvoir is making are specific to this situation in Meru, but also are applicable to things still going on today, not just in the United States, in our recent past. I mean, you can look at all kinds of coal mining accidents throughout Kentucky, West Virginia. I mean, very recently, sludge dams breaking free in West Virginia, causing huge amounts of environmental and personal harm, causing all kinds of health problems for which nobody is punished. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, all of those kinds of situations. Also, garment factory workers in places like Bangladesh and other developing nations that are used as sites of cheap labor for markets in more developed nations like the United States and China. So I think there's a lot of analogies and connections to be made between the kind of arguments that Beauvoir is making in this very short article that she had written for J'accuse and the current late capitalist mode of production that we see in the United States and around the world. Right? So the problem that Beauvoir is addressing here has not gone away. It has not been adequately addressed or rectified, and in some instances has perhaps even gotten worse when you look at the death toll at a place like the Rana Plaza collapse. So we're seeing the real consequences of the existentialist philosophy for political and ethical considerations coming through pretty strongly in this piece. So the next thing I'm going to want to look at much more closely, here is Beauvoir operating in the political sphere of France. Her and Sartre are also very vocal and active about French foreign policy in Algeria particularly, but also in what was at the time French Indochina, now Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, those places. So again, here you see Beauvoir dealing with domestic politics and systemic problems within the French under sort of a capitalist regime. And next we want to turn and look at the foreign policy of France and the aftermath of colonialism and that kind of thing. So shifting gears in the context that we're focused on, but seeing similar ethical and political concerns emerge relative to those very different contexts under colonialism. Okay? So thanks. I really like these sort of short pieces that Beauvoir and Sartre write. This really speaks to their role as a public intellectual and not just sort of an academic who's writing esoteric essays about the nature of being and all this kind of stuff, but that they're really out there advocating for, and I mean, Beauvoir says in television interviews, propagandizing in a way. She has a position that she has reasoned herself to, that she has certain conclusions that she's drawn based upon her experience and way of thinking about the world, and she's going to advocate for them. And if people think that that's propagandizing for something, she says, why wouldn't I propagandize for a political position that I believe is right? So you can see Beauvoir and Sartre's attitude and how they view themselves as writers and as advocates for issues in workers' rights and the rights of people who have been colonized by European powers and so on. So I think these can be potentially very powerful and little arguments that they are made that serve a broader political context, and also gives us some insight into how Beauvoir and Sartre particularly viewed themselves as public intellectuals and what the responsibilities of public intellectuals were. Okay, so that is the very short polemical article in France Today, Killing Goes Unpunished. I hope you enjoyed it. We will turn and look at Beauvoir's preface to a very important, I think, but severely understudied incident and book, Jamila Boupacha. Thank you.